Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by two special guests. And so just to give you some context, I work at George Mason University, and recently we were going to do a panel for the Black Alumni Chapter on Black well-being at work. And unfortunately, that panel got postponed, but I felt like this topic was so needed for the listeners of the Positive Philter, and just for me, for my own well-being. So I got the panelists that were going to be on that panel, and I said, we're going to still chop it up anyway. So I'm joined by Sonya Henry and Meaghon Omobude. And so let's do some quick introductions and just get right into the topic that we were going to do for that panel. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, how about Sonya, you go first. Just a little introduction of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Sonya Henry. I currently serve as the interim director for Leading to Wellbeing programs at George Mason University within the Center for the Advancement of Wellbeing. So that's what I do for work. As like more introductions, I'm a Southerner, a proud Southerner, representing Atlanta and New Orleans, and just a lover of people, you know, of their stories, of their experiences, and how they navigate life. So
I love it. And Meaghon, how about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Phil. Again, my name is Meaghon Omobude. My pronouns are she, they. And I am a licensed graduate professional counselor. I am also an alumni of George Mason University, class of 2018. I recently graduated with my master's in clinical mental health counseling at Marymount University last August. And currently I work again as a counselor, particularly with people, BIPOC populations that identify as queer and or neurodivergent. And I currently reside in the DC area, and currently working with DC residents. As more of a further introduction, like Sonya, I'm also a Southerner. I grew up in Georgia, spent some time in Georgia. A lot of my family's from Mississippi, but I've been in Northern Virginia for a while here, so this is also home.
So, you know, obviously this topic was about well-being, and I think that's why I would say it was so needed, just with everything that's going on, and you know, the rise in mental health, and these topics being so needed. So what does well-being mean to both of y'all? And, you know, you can take whoever wants to go first. What, for you as an individual, what does well-being mean to you? How about Meaghon, you go first?
Yeah. Sure, I guess we'll go back and forth. Yeah. So that's a great question. Well-being mean to me, it's encompassing of really the mind and body, right? And then for those who may identify with the spiritual component, that's also a part of it. But I think we place a lot of emphasis, especially in the United States, and more so in like Western culture, a lot of emphasis on the physical well-being, right? Like exercising, diet, things like that. And I think as I've come into my journey of mental health and obviously becoming a therapist, there's a huge component of well-being that involves emotional wellness, right? So for me, it really means taking time to listen to not only my body physically, but what my mind is saying, right? How do I feel? Taking time to rest, just being more aware of the things around me and how I interact with the world as well. So, there's a lot of different components to it, but that's what it means to me in short.
I love it. How about you, Sonya?
yeah, I love it. I second everything that Meaghon shared. But for me, I love the word well-being. You know, the ing is something that sticks out to me. It's an ongoing process. It's an active process of, you know, figuring out how to lead a life that makes you feel healthy, happy, and whole. And so, there are many different components of well-being, as Meaghon was sharing, but there's also this idea for me of finding what works for you, building that toolkit of different practices and knowledge, et cetera, to, be happy, whole, and yeah.
Good. Well, I think y'all both brought it up because I think y'all, I'm saying y'all, I'm like turning Southern myself. I don't know if I can claim myself as Southern. I was from all over the place, but you both made a very specific point to do an extended introduction, right? Not just your title and not just where you work, but then you had this very strong identity where you said Southern. And so I think I want to dive into, do you think, how does identity play in to well-being? And particularly we were going to say about your how does your Black identity play into well-being? And just jump in. I wish you could see us, whoever wants to just really dive into that, but like you really made it a point. Maybe even how does that Southern, you said that particularly Southern identity play into your well-being?
I can start. And this is like really at the forefront of my mind because I had the opportunity to go back to my roots, to my original hometown, my birthplace, about 2 weeks ago. So I'm from New Orleans, and growing up, I didn't know or have the language at the time, but well-being and resilience were a part of every aspect of my upbringing. New Orleans, we celebrate big, we party big, but we're a very resilient population, community, right? Like there's a lot of poverty there. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of like the weather patterns and, all of those things. But growing up, I definitely lived where there was that not contradiction, but that balance of
that duality, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And so that definitely gave me a strong foundation of what well-being looks like. It's not just like all happy all the time, but it's how do you find that balance and how do you find the meaning in the difficult times, but also prioritizing celebrating. And I think being Southern, being from New Orleans, that's the lens through which I experienced my philosophy of well-being. And I think it's very, it's a big part of the Black American story as well. Like that duality of celebrating through suffering at times. So
like celebration through trauma. How about you, Meaghon? How does your identity play into that or well-being?
So I really want to second everything that Sonya has already mentioned, especially myself also being from the South. A lot of that resonates with me. And so, like she said, I didn't always have the language to describe, the things that I was learning in school, right? Like, I remember sitting in a class and learning about intersectionality for the first time and like what that means. And so a lot of the things I learned in school, it was like, okay, this makes sense to me. Like I've experienced this as like a Black queer woman, but we don't always have access to the language that some of this is centered around, especially once you start to get into like higher education and some of these more professional spaces. But I say all that to say, I mean, there's such an amount of resilience that comes with being a Black American, that comes with being a Black Southerner. I'm going to take it a step farther and also include my queer identity, right? There's so much resilience that comes with that because there's also an equal amount of trauma, right? And so for me, I think I really place a lot of emphasis on the lived experience as a Black person, right? Like before I can sit down with a client and give them all these clinical terms, I want to know like, who are you, right? What resonates with you? What's your story, right? Because that's going to inform how we work together. And that having that sort of like shared cultural experience of being Black or being queer or being whatever, brings us closer together than any type of clinical approach that I could, share with them, right? And I think also being Black, in our community, there's a lot of celebration that comes with food, right? You think about the holidays and like the traditions that are shared over food, and even church. You know, I grew up in a very from a religious background, so we have a lot of the tools, right, that have kept us going for generations, and that have allowed us to persevere. And so I'm interested in really just being able to take what we already have, right, and make it more accessible, right? Make it so that I can bridge the gap between what we already have, right, and what the world thinks we have. So,
Well, I think it's fascinating because I think about too, like, you know, when I was thinking before I started studying well-being and diving into it, I thought it was like yoga and, you know, white women, you know, I don't know, you know, like the eat, pray, love and all the, you know, like, you know,
exactly,
very like, you know, hokey pokey. And then
exactly,
I realized over time that it shows up differently. You know, like when you see a Black guy, you say, "What's up, King?" and you uplift them words of affirmation. That's, you know, gratitude. That's well-being. And so we always, I love the word that you said. We just didn't have, the language is different, but we always had the tools. It was always there, right? Like, and it's expressed differently, you know, through music and food and culture and community. And we've always been proponents and practitioners of well-being. It's just reshaping it. So how do you think that shows up at work? How do you think bringing those cultural experiences play out at work, like bringing that sense of resilience to work as someone that's Black?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. For me, it's definitely changed over the years. I would say when I first entered the professional space, I was really cognizant of how I entered certain spaces, especially being, the only Black person in a predominantly white space. Now, you know, I'm thankful that I am able to show up a lot more as myself in some of these spaces. But it's as simple as just like my hair, right? I think I placed a lot of emphasis on making sure that my hair was done, and like, well, what type of style do I want to wear? Like, and so now I'm just like, whatever, like my hair may not be, it may not be a fresh fade, but I'm just going to show up on this meeting anyway, because I mean, what does it matter? Little things like that, or just not feeling like I have to, um, code switch as much. Like a lot of the times now I say things as I say them, right? I don't try to sit and figure out, okay, well, how is this gonna sound? Like, I feel like I don't want to place a lot of emphasis on code switching or not being able to show up fully as I am, because that in turn causes me more stress, right? Then I'm at home after work, like, man, having to decompress because I've spent 8 hours, sometimes more, just not even being able to show up as myself. So I mean, there's still some work there, right? I wish I could say that it's easy and that everything's perfect, but I think little steps like just not placing as much emphasis on like my hair and maybe the way I'm speaking 100% of the time has definitely helped as well.
You know, I find that fascinating. One thing I thought about, I used to joke that my code switch button was broke. You know, like I was like, I don't know, I just never thought about it. I just, and I remember the nuances and mannerisms of at early young professional. Someone, old colleague, told me I rap adapt with my hands. Meaning, like, you know, I was like, I'm too expressive? And then I used to put my hands in my pocket, and then it just took someone to see me where I did a normal way here at George Mason. I talked the same. And they say, wow, you really connect. You're very passionate. And I was doing the same thing with my hands. And it was understanding that, like, over time, I'm going to let it be natural, because putting on a mask, or it is taxing. There's a taxation to
Exactly.
Black. And like, I don't feel like paying that tax anymore. I think as you get older, you pay it less and less. Like, talk to one of your uncles and aunties as they get older. They don't care. They're like, what are they gonna do? Fire me? But like, I think early on we had that responsibility to have that taxation. Sonya, what do you think about that when you hear the word, the Black tax at work, and how do you navigate that?
Well, I'm glad to hear both of you have found ways to kind of let some of that go, because that's personally something I still struggle with. And I question, like, I censor myself a lot, and I'm aware of that. And, I will use it strategically.
Yeah, you have
right.
To, yeah.
And so I think when I think of myself as a professional, like 10 years ago versus now, there has been an evolution, but that's still an area of growth for me, because I think when you're a Black woman who's still relatively young, or like you look younger than you might be, right? And there's just a lot of perceived judgment,
Yes. Yep.
likely actual judgment that
Yes.
comes with that, where people are like, oh, you're too young, or what do you know as a director of this office, or what do you know about well-being or organizational development, all of these things. So there's this pressure to prove yourself, and to prove yourself as competent while being confident, and maybe like in reality, you're like a duck underwater, and you're, like freaking out, right?
You already know I use duck underwater all the time.
And some of that is imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, learning how to use your voice effectively to share different perspectives that other people in the room may not be aware of, to advocate for, different policies or practices that are more inclusive to the workplace. I think there's pressure, but there's a lot of power in that too. And so I think as I continue to grow as a professional in this space, I'm learning the power of my voice, and not to shy away from it as much. But I also, like your earlier question, I think well-being, especially when it comes to work, there's all of those like individual things that you do as an individual, as a person, for like self-care and all of that. But you cannot self-care your way out of a toxic work environment. And I think that is the other part of the conversation, that, offices and organizations have a lot of responsibility to help their employees of color, their employees that have, different identities that they're bringing to the workplace, that need to be taken care of, and to be acknowledged, in different practices and flexibility and all of those things. And so that's something, as a Black professional, that I think about a lot as well.
It's funny, this is very timely that I was talking to my dad the other day, and I was like, Dad, I want to navigate this, at work and be my full self. But at the same time, I understand there's politics and systems, right? I'm in a system. And so like, he was like, even his 30-year military career, he was like, I knew that there's things I did in my career that I knew hindered me from promotions. But then at the end of the day, he said, but at the end of the day, I'd rather be myself and live that truth than navigate that and hold that up, which was really powerful to hear from my dad. And then he also told me, like, understand allyship, and maybe you don't have to always be the voice, like you always think about, like, always the voice of justice is those that are marginalized. Like, why don't you get someone else to voice things for you, the messenger.
Right.
And I was like, wow, Dad, my dad's dropping mad gems yesterday. He was like, yo, maybe you need to be more strategic and, just connect with people that you trust and do that. So hearing that story about my dad, how have you thought about like navigating relationships? Because I know you just spoke about toxic work environment, but relationships is integral to well-being, your relationships with your colleagues and stuff. So how do you navigate that? How do you determine if you have good relationships at work, whatnot? And good to sit with it too, if you need to think.
Meaghon, would you like me to start this one?
Sure, if you don't mind.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no problem. Well, just kind of going back to what you were saying, relationships and well-being, like that's the number one indicator of well-being, is like the quality of your social relationships, right? So having community, having individual relationships is so important. And obviously in the workplace, I grew up hearing like, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
Yeah, we all-
And I think that's still true. But I think a step ahead of that is who knows you, right? Like when you have someone who knows like who you are as a person, what you value, as well as like your products, right? Like how good of a worker you are or the quality of your outputs.
That's where the advocacy comes in.
That's where the advocacy and the sponsorship comes in, the connections, and I think some of it you don't unfortunately have as much control sometimes, right? Like you may not have the ear of people who can really like do that advocacy on your behalf. And sometimes like you reach out to people to try to establish those relationships and it doesn't really work out. But when you do have that magic, you know, like those people who you know and who know you, and, you know, they put you on special projects or they give you growth opportunities, that's like a major catalyst or could be a major catalyst for your career advancement. But I think also it is so important to have people within your organization as well as outside of your field of work who are in similar positions to really talk through challenges and to brainstorm like, oh, or share stories, right? Because I've had opportunities where, you know, friendships and not other people of color, but friendships in the, well, you know, and I kind of use air quotes there, but definitely positive relationships within the workplace where there was transparency of like, well, okay, you got a raise, like how much did they offer you, right? And having
Yes,
those
exactly.
conversations where people were really honest, and that allowed me to advocate for myself when the time came, right? And so I think relationships are absolutely vital for your advancement, but also to be happy at work, to enjoy working. Like, oh, who can I have lunch with? Who can I need a break. Let me go to this colleague and chop it up for a little bit, right? To brainstorm ideas. Like those are absolutely vital to being successful in the workplace.
And I think you spoke about the power of group too. You know, like that's why, you know, employer resource groups work, or going to conferences, or going, you know, like Philip was like, how quickly is Philip going to bring up fraternities? You know, that's why I got, you know, the community of my Alpha brothers. I think that definitely, like, if you don't have a space at your normal 9 to 5, having certain spaces outside of work helps me bring that to work. You know, and people, particularly like ones where they might not be working with you day to day, but they're in the same industry. So, you know, oh, how do you navigate that at your institution? You know, so I found really a lot of benefit of connecting with other Black men in higher ed across the country. I'm like, wow, what are you seeing at your university? It really does help. So that's a good one. Meaghon, how about you? How do you, you know, navigate in a relationship space?
Yeah, again, I agree with a lot of what Sonya has said already, but they're very important, especially to well-being in the workplace. And I think, you know, I've had to become a lot more open-minded, especially if I'm the only Black person in a space, right? I've had to really be like, okay, you know, jokingly have suggested, hey, we should go to happy hour, and then having a person actually follow up and be like, hey, you know, when do you want to go to happy hour, or when do you want to connect, you know, and being like, oh, you know what, I wouldn't imagine, you know, I didn't imagine being able to connect with you, but it's nice to be able to have a space where, you know, like Sonya said, we're talking about salary transparency, right? And, you know, hearing what this person makes and being like, okay, well, I know I need to advocate for myself when the time comes, right? And then also I've had to do a lot of networking. You know, it can be taxing, but I am finally starting to see the benefits, right, of being able to network. And even just with you, Phil, I mean, we've connected probably like years ago, you know, and just even being able to be here on your show, just seeing the fruits of being able to put myself out there, and maybe at times feeling a little discouraged because maybe a connection didn't go where I thought it would, but realizing that rejection is not always. Sometimes it's just redirection, right? It's not necessarily rejection.
Or
So
no, it's maybe a not yet, or
exactly, and not yet, exactly.
yeah.
So yeah.
I know. I think one thing I also thought about too with the connections is that how do you vet people? So as someone that navigates a lot of spaces as the only, or the few, I use another parameter of vetting, which mainly for me is their values. Like I look at clearly their values and how they like live it, not in a performative way. Meaning like if they say they're about social justice, yeah, cool, you got all these stickers and bumper stickers, but I'm looking at how you navigate day to day, like, and I see it, you can see people like, oh, they're ride or dies. And so that's a way for me to really examine that not every advocate is very visible.
I
Like
agree.
like what you said, so it might not be like a huggy, you did a great job, but it's like, oh, they put me on to an opportunity. Um, and they probably had to advocate for me to be on that opportunity. That took a lot of courage, like speaking of my names in rooms that I'm not in. Like, okay,
Exactly.
starting to use that as my filter of like, that's my people or not. So what are some other ways that you can, and not just in regards to race, but what are some other ways for well-being to vet positive relationships at work?
Phil, I think you hit it on the mark there. I think I do the same thing of just like values. I'm very values driven in my work. And so, again, you know, like this coworker that I mentioned, him saying, I believe in salary transparency, like that was like,
Yeah.
we had talked about other things, social justice related, but him even adding that and letting me know, hey, like you should advocate for yourself, like you should be making more, that was like, oh, you believe in me or you see something, right? You
Mm.
and I appreciate that. And also when people realize that, when I realize that people are coming from a place of collaboration and not competing with me, right? I think that's a big thing as a Black woman,
Abundant.
um, and having to navigate spaces where I'm the only Black woman or one of few, is trying to sort of ascertain, are you really here to help me, or is there some type of other motive, right? Is this a
Mhm.
competition?
Right.
Because that can be a lot too. But I would definitely agree and say that I'm mostly values driven, and as long as our values align, then that's sort of a path forward for me to explore more of the connection.
I love that. I mean, what strategy do you think that Black professionals can employ to prioritize their well-being and self-care while still um, pursuing goals? And the reason I brought that up, I don't know, this is not everyone's feeling, but we grew up with this mindset. You got to work 10 times harder to, as a Black. But then I've, studies have shown Black men suffer from the John Henry syndrome, which is basically working themselves to death, like over stress, right? And that hustle mindset, I remember there was a toxic video. It was not new, but like, I don't sleep. And you're like, that's bad. like, those videos like I hustle 24 hours, I don't sleep.
Yeah.
That's not a
Everyone has the same
like
24 hours.
yeah, it's like don't brag that like how you bragging about not sleeping. That's not good for you. And so how do we prioritize our well-being and health while also being career driven? How do you navigate that?
I love this question, and I think the previous conversation about being values driven, living your life in a value driven way, is really foundational to that, right? Because when you're really clear about what's important to you and what you value, you can then design the rest of your life around that, right? Because balance is like one of my top words, and I'm very clear that balance can be sequential. It's very rare that everything is like going in perfect flow and at the same time for me. But I also know like it might be like 6 months to a year I'm working on another degree or a certification, so that's where a lot of my attention is. And then there might be another period of time where I'm socializing more, I'm focusing on my personal life or my, and so like at the end of my goal is, when I'm a fabulous 85-year-old, I can look back and say like, yes, I did it all. And I'm proud of the life I've led, right? That's kind of what balance means to me. And so I think for other Black professionals, being clear on what it is that's important to you and, the amount of time and what you're willing to sacrifice for, basically, right? Because that's going to look different for each individual. But I think being clear on your values, being clear on who you are, that can help you balance work life, and balance the well-being piece and know like, okay, well, I'm almost stressed out, but the longer goal, it's worth it, right?
I'm always smiling because you already know that I'm talking. You got balance and all that, and I was like, I got too many goals. I think I run myself ragged. You already know that, so I'm working on that one, and I like the 85-year-old. Those are goals. I don't know. That's like the life average for a Black male. I think it was like 78 or something like that. We're the lowest. I was like, man, I'm going for the record. I'm just trying to, I'm going for the average. And I told my wife, I was like, you got about 10 more years after me to have your second husband. But I don't know. Get on Tinder at 85, you good. You know what I'm saying? But, but I mean, I think that is true, like clear visions. I think one exercise I've done, and I showed you this, right? Then I showed you that. You're like, oh my goodness, Philip, this is overwhelming me. As I wrote all my roles in life. Did I show you that list?
I think you were supposed to.
Okay, I need to show you that list, and I showed it. Oh, actually, I showed it to my supervisor Matt recently, and the first word he went, "Oh," like, look, and I was like, I don't think that's a good sign that when someone opens. So I'm trying to work on writing out what's important to me, as you said, prioritizing, and be like, I have to Marie Kondo some of this stuff. I have to say, it's okay, let it go. And that list is so hard for me. So I'll show you that list, but I think that goes along with it. I know what my values are, but it's also the time for those values.
Yeah.
What about you? How do you deal with this toxic hustle mindset culture, Meaghon?
Oh, well, I'm still dealing with it, coming out of a grad program that was, very, very rigorous and doing internship and, still working two jobs, right? But I do feel like I'm happy, right? And it's a long process. And I think as time has gone on, I've realized, I don't have to do everything. I have another full-time job in addition to what I do as a therapist. And like, I'm chilling. Like I do my work, right? I do what's expected of me, but I'm okay with not, having to rise to all these different positions. As long as the money aligns with the work I'm doing, I'm fine, right? Because I found I've taken the time to be like, okay, well, what are my values, right? And how do I do work that's meaningful to that? And that's part of that is therapy. So, my full-time job, I work my 40 hours, 40-ish, right? And I close my laptop and I go about my day. I don't stress about anything related to that anymore because it's paying the bills. I'm content, right? But I think there was a time where I was like, hey, I need to get promoted to this and I need to get this certification. And it's like, well, what is that? Does that add value to my life, right? Is that purposeful for me? And so I've had to kind of sit down and really think about, it's fine to get the certifications, right? It's fine to go back and go to school, but as long as it's aligned with what I want to do, instead of feeling like I have to do it just because, I need to prove something to other people. I think it's less about me proving stuff to other people and more so being able to fulfill myself and what I think is important to me.
I like, Meaghon, I like how you said, I am happy, right? And you know that happiness in that sense is a state of being at that, like we can't be happy forever, but you're saying right now in this moment, I'm happy. How do you assess that you're happy right now?
Well, that's the thing is that it's happiness. I think we perceive it as a state of being, right? And that it's constant, and it's not constant, because 6 months ago, I was very stressed trying to find a job, just graduated, but just was very stressed. Right. And so I think happiness it really is less about being in that constant state of being, but more about being aligned with your values, with your
Mhm.
purpose, right? That's not to say that I haven't had bad days or that I haven't felt good, but
Mhm.
everything that I'm doing right now is aligned with my
Yeah.
purpose and with my values. So that's what happiness is to me, that everything that I'm doing is aligned with the rich and meaningful life that I'm pursuing, more
Mhm.
so than a constant feeling that I feel every day when I get up, right?
Yeah. We did that. We talked about that last week, Sonya.
Yeah.
We talked about how like it is not absolute joy or that feeling of joy. It's just overall, like you said, alignment. And so I started doing a thing where I'm like, 1 through 10, how do I feel today? And understand that I'm never going to be a 10 forever. That's literally like euphoria, you're
Exactly.
on drugs or something. I don't know. Like no one's always a 10, right? You spike, you might have a 10 moment. I remember
Right,
10 moments like getting married. That was a 10. That was the best, awesome day, right? But that was one
right.
day, right? And then I said on the opposite end, 0 or 1, I need to get checked into it. I'm at risk to myself, right? So this really thing, I'm like, okay, as long as I'm navigating around a 6 or 7, I'm good. That don't mean I'm too sad. I'm not too happy. I'm
Right.
7,
Mhm.
and I understand that I'll spike and have really great moments, but I understand that my set point, at least if I'm living at a 7, I'm okay. How does that statement resonate with you? That notion that it's up and down and it's not absolute, Meaghon.
Oh yeah, I mean I agree. That's what I when I'm working with clients, that's another thing that I try to work with them on, is that I think
Mhm.
in our culture and society, we've been taught that, happiness is a feeling and that it's constant, or that, if you're not happy, something's wrong. And it's like,
Mhm.
again, how do you ensure that you are in alignment with your values and your purpose, right? And I think happiness can mean different things for different people, and it's also figuring out what that means to you. So I love the idea of a scale, and figuring out, okay, 6 or 7 is good, and these are the points where I should be concerned, or where I may need additional support. I love
Mhm.
that. And actually, I'll probably incorporate that with some of my clients. So thank
Mhm.
Right,
you.
right, a 7. And then go ahead, son, because remember we talked about the separation that you might be a 1 through 10 in your personal life and a two at
Yeah.
two at work. Like I think about that, the compartmentalizing those things.
Yeah, I think this scale and being able to kind of take a step back to objectively assess, like, how am I really doing, right? And to do that in your personal life, like more holistically, and at work. And like, I personally had a period of time where I was hovering. We kind of talked about this
Mhm.
the other week, where I was kind of hovering around a 3 or 4, and there were just a lot of things going on,
Mhm.
multiple aspects. And I really had to be real with myself and evaluate, like, okay, well, what is it? And at the time, it was like just
Yeah.
everything, right?
Right, right.
Ways it was, but I had to be really strategic and say, like, okay, what part of it, I was in grad school at the time, what part of it is temporary and
Yes.
has a
Yeah.
bigger purpose,
Right.
right?
Right, right.
School, it was like, all right, this is kind of challenging right now, but it's going to be worth it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then I was looking at other areas, and I wasn't happy with my job. I wasn't happy with like management and the opportunity to like really use my talents in alignment with my values, and to be compensated and valued for what I was contributing, right?
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, this is a priority for me to work on changing. And then it was kind of a domino effect after that. Like, once I was able to pinpoint, like, it really is my job that is contributing most to this kind of feeling of languishing, suffering.
Yeah. Languishing. Yeah. And then I think one of the things I think about too is that we go in waves. Like there's a time where there's going to be a sucky, like you embrace the suck, where like I already know, someone gets sick that you care about and you're a caregiver, like the next couple months or year or so is going to be a 5. But understanding that like that is it's almost, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Like this is not permanent. Just make it through the suck. But then on the other end too is, I love what you said too, is like pinpointing what do I really have agency over and which do I don't? Like someone else getting
Yes.
sick, I have no agency over that. But, reaching out to a friend, I have agency on that. So like, what do I do?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Meaghon.
No, I was just agreeing. I agree, and I like being strategic in that, and sort of breaking down and looking at the different areas, right? Like you may be content in one area, right? But what else is going on? Is it school, right? Is it work? So I love that.
And I will also say that sometimes when we're navigating those difficult times, it's really easy to kind of retreat into our shells, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that at work, sometimes in our personal lives too. But I found I guess at that time in my life, I was just too tired not to be real, right?
Yeah.
And so
Right.
I was able to have some really honest conversations with people, and I was able to connect in ways that I wouldn't have if I was too like ashamed of not being okay, right? And I found
Mhm.
it to be really helpful because I was able to either find people who had been through similar situations and for them to share their stories and for me to find some wisdom from their experiences, or I found people who were willing to kind of help me brainstorm and say like, well, have you thought about this? Right. Because I agree to an extent of what you said. Like, if you're a caregiver or something, you have to just embrace the suck. But I think, yes, and you can find ways to embrace the suck more strategically or more or a little make
Healthier,
it healthier, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's done through like relationships or talking to people because they have access or resources or just wisdom that you might not be aware of while you're trying to navigate these difficult times on your own. So I found that to be helpful, and particularly in the workplace, right? I think building those relationships, having those conversations with people you can trust, right? Because you can't always have you shouldn't have vulnerable conversations
Right.
without trust, right? But
Right.
when you have those people and that's where you can really find help to make it through and to find ways to really like come back to that thriving stage.
Yeah. So, I mean, this has been great. This has been a great episode. I normally would do a shot for shot, but we got two guests. Well, maybe we could do this. How about this? Everyone ask one question randomly for the other two people. Want me to go first? I'll go first.
You should go first because I'm like,
All right.
what
Yes.
kind of question?
I agree.
We all just get to ask any random question to each other. So my question is for you two Southerners is what has better Southern cuisine, New Orleans, or I'm trying to think of any other insert barbecue. Okay, never mind. Let me phrase this. What region of the United States has the best cuisine? Food.
I would say the South because New Orleans. And
Yeah,
you could not finish it because it's
Yeah.
you can't just But shout out to all the places that have fabulous barbecue. We do that, but a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah, that was a hard one. I don't know. I was gonna say, okay, how about this one? Which okay, I had this debate, and this is a real debate. Which region of rap or hip hop is the best?
Oh, that's still the same. The South. Come
Yeah,
on.
no,
The
that
South.
was me too. I was getting kidded. Like I had like a lot of people that was like, "Oh, New York's the Mecca." I was like, "Boo."
That's funny.
I was like,
It's the dirty South. It's the dirty
South. No,
South.
it is. I was gonna say the South because I already lumped in Atlanta. That's it. New Orleans. That's it. Texas.
Texas.
The slow draw, like all that, and it's different. So not all those different. Miami, we got the Florida bounce, whatever.
Yep.
I just think the South just has the most influential styles, and then even the South has influence and come up to other places like ASAP Rocky and all these people taking that like it's all over. So it's the South. And sorry for the West Coast people that think no, it was the South. The South still has it.
Yeah. I would say West Coast is probably at a close second for me.
Oh, you say okay. Over the New York. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I think I listen to more West Coast artists, but yeah, the South is definitely. I mean, you think of any dances that came up like in the early mid 2000s, like
Yeah, the
you
South.
got the Soldier Boy, right? Like all these different things. It's the South.
The South.
So
True.
Producers. I'm claiming Virginia too. Technically, is Southern.
Yeah, it is.
It's
yeah,
below-
it's Southern. Everything below like Fairfax.
Oh, Fairfax. All right. What's your question for the rest of us?
Since we're talking about music, I love having like a playlist, right, that I go to kind of get me out of a funk.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, like, what are some like either songs or artists that would be on your get it together playlist?
I mean, I think it depends. My favorite song of all time, which throws people off, is "Everlong" by Foo Fighters. Like everyone's like, "Well, that's random."
Okay.
Yeah, but that's like my favorite song. And then I listened. One album that I listened to over. Well, two artists that I listened to over. Big Crit. I still listen to him a lot.
Big Crit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Okay.
and then Kendrick Lamar, but like I'm not. Oh no, I'm not saying that just because of now. I actually used to play over and over and over. What's the jump? Good Kid, Mad City, over and over again. Or it depends.
Yeah, that's a classic.
I'd play those two over and over, like straight through, over and over. And damn, actually, I would just play those three over and over, like on a road trip. And they really, like for instance, the song "God" by Kendrick Lamar. That's on Damn. That's really one of my favorite songs. I just had these songs
Okay.
listen over and over again. So I'll go Kendrick and Big Crit and J. Cole. They get me out of a funk.
Okay.
Okay. I like that. Good choices. Good choices. See, now I'm using music to vet you, Phil. So now you're good to go.
Yeah, I'm still
You're
watching.
good to go. For me, I would say I listen to a lot of soft rock, like a lot of early 2000s soft rock. So like Nickelback,
Harry
who
Moore.
else? Like, yeah, like all of that, like just alternative, like rock is typically what I'm listening to while I'm doing work or if I just need something to mellow me out. So Fall Out Boy.
Ooh.
I'm like blanking on all the artists,
How about
but
Incubus? Do you listen to Incubus?
Incubus, yeah,
That
Drive,
was
that's
me
a
in high school.
classic. Maroon
Linkin Park.
5,
Yeah, Linkin Park. That
Linkin
was like
Park. So
311.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's my playlist.
Okay, I bet with that. I need to go back and listen. That was me like in high school. I used to listen to Linkin Park all the time and it'd be like, I don't know, having a little
Yep.
in my room by myself. All right, what's your question for us?
Where is a place that you have either traveled to recently that you
Mm.
enjoyed or that is coming up? So upcoming travel, either or.
Last summer, I think, was my first trip to the New England area, and I went to Cape Cod and Maine. I really enjoyed that. So that's one place. A consistent place that I go almost every summer that I really enjoy is Outer Banks in North Carolina. That's just so
Cool.
those places. The water. I think basically the commonality is the water.
Yep.
And, yeah, water, beach, lake.
Yep.
It could be anything that's near water. I feel happy.
Okay.
Yep, I feel that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I guess I'm ending where I started off. Like I said, I went to New Orleans about 2 weeks ago. It's my, I was born there, but I hadn't been there since January 2020.
Oh, wow.
And so I had, a great time reconnecting with some family and just like, being a tourist too and having fun. So that was fun. And looking forward to some like smaller trips this summer. Hanging out with friends like New York,
Yes.
Eastern Shore of Maryland, that, little things like that to just kind of recharge.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great. Thank you so much for both being guests. This is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. So shout outs, you get to show love to anyone you want to show love to. And then plugs, these are things where people can connect with you and or things that you're working on that you'd like me to put in the show notes. Either or.
Sonya, would you like to round us off here?
Sure. So first I will give a shout out to I guess my mom, because she is a Black woman and she navigated a pretty high stakes professional life. And as a retiree, we talk a lot, and I've learned from her mistakes and, missteps. So shout out to mom. And in terms of plugs, I have to plug my fabulous office, the Center for the Advancement of Wellbeing. We have a lot of amazing work with the research behind the science of well-being, to offering a variety of programs for professionals to learn about leadership, executive coaching, and just making your organization a better place for everyone. So check us out at wellbeing.gmu.edu. And I'll turn it over to you, Meaghon.
Yes, thank you. So I guess for shout outs, so I'd like to shout out both of you. Phil, thank you so much for having us on the show. I really appreciate you reaching out and still making an effort to have this conversation. And looking forward to when the actual panel gets rescheduled in the fall, hopefully sometime. Additional shout outs, I'd like to shout out my partner. She's very supportive of all the work that I do. And just also want to shout out all of my friends and anyone who's supported me up until this point. Very thankful for the community that I've been able to curate over the years, especially while I was at Mason. And as far as plugs, again, as I noted, I am a therapist. So you can find more about what I do and how I work with clients either on Psychology Today or at barththerapy.com. That's BARTH therapy.com.
Got it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Positive Filter listeners, as you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all the work he did fighting food insecurity across the world. Additionally, if you're a member of the Mason Nation, please consider submitting a Pats for Patriots. It's a program that I'm really happy about, where you can send a nice e-card to one of your fellow Mason students, professors, faculty members, or alum to just uplift their day. Giving this episode a like or subscribe or rating or review helps elevate the podcast. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.